where you are, it is certainly a better temperature and a better weather than where I am. Regardless, I thank you for being here with us in this space and to always support the Jamaica Teaching Council's activities. Once you see those links, I can count on my teachers to join. This afternoon's discussion, as I said before, is being streamed live on YouTube and on other social media platforms. And let me just welcome those persons who can now see us on YouTube, because up to perhaps 30 seconds ago, that was not the case. Welcome to this space. If you have questions and you're on the YouTube channel, feel free to post those comments in the chat on the YouTube channel, and we have persons monitoring those chats. They will pass them on to us here in the Zoom room so that we can ask our participants to respond to your comments or to your questions. This afternoon is a very important discussion. We are going to be engaging some stakeholders in the field. I am almost tempted to say in the trenches, where we will be talking to these stakeholders about the education of boys in our school system. This is a sore point, one that has hounded us for many years. And by now, to be honest, there are many persons among us who might think that this is a cliche, in the sense that this discussion has been had too many times before. This afternoon, right on the cusp of COVID-19, with so many things happening with respect to the changes in our education system, I think it is an opportune time for us to have that discussion again. We are joined this afternoon by 4 practitioners who have significant experience as educators working with boys, but working with students and also boys. And we also have a student. Just allow me to introduce these individuals to you very quickly. We have Mario Sams. Mario Sams is a teacher is actually a guidance counselor. Let me just pull up my notes so that I don't embarrass myself by trying to go from memory. Mario Sams is a guidance counselor at Licensed Primary. He is also a Justice of the Peace. We also have Mr. Antroy Graham. Mr. Antroy Graham is from Mile Gully High, and he's a Dean of Discipline. Mr. Fitzroy Abbott is a principal at Sunbury Primary School. We are very happy to have you, Mr. Abbott. And we also have, as I said before, a student, one Javon Hyman, who is a grade 11 student at Woolmer's Boys School. In addition to those persons, we have Mr. Bonnie Rose. Mr. Rose is a musician and a teacher who I've had the pleasure of just making his acquaintance. Mr. Rose told me just now that he has been teaching for 15 years, and he's also a recognized musician doing private lessons online. Mr. Rose himself has a very interesting, and might I even say inspirational story, where he mentioned to me that he actually lived while attending school as a child in a boys' home as a ward of the state. Mr. Rose, as a ward of the state, was able to access quality education, and as a result, matriculated to De Carteret College. He has completed his first degree since then. He is now completing his master's in counseling and has every intention of pursuing the PhD. I felt it was especially useful to have Mr. Rose on this panel, as we can get significant insight, I think, from his own experience as a learner, but also his experience as a teacher. I just want to go through and ensure that all the persons who are supposed to be here are actually here. So I want to start with, let me start with Javon Hyman. You can just open your mic and just ensure that we have a sound check. Javon?
Yes, sir, I'm right here.
Okay, great. Welcome, Javon. Going down the list, Mario.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Mario. I see you are stranded in your car.
Yes.
Yes, yes, indeed. Welcome, welcome, Mario. Um, in addition, we're supposed to have Mr. Abbott Fitzroy. Fitzroy, I can't find you in the room. So if you are in the room, now might be a good time to raise your hand so that I can find you. You're perhaps not using your device. And okay, here we go. Graham the third. Makes sense. I'm going to make you co-host Fitzroy so that you can unmute yourself. You are now co-host. You can go ahead and unmute and just do a quick sound check and greeting. Mr. Graham?
Good evening, everyone.
Ah, there you go. Hi, Mr. Graham. Thank you very much for joining us.
No problem. It's a pleasure being here.
Great, great, great. Mr. Abbott. Again, Fitzroy, if you are here, I am not able to identify you in the room. So if you raise your hand, I can find you in the participants list and make you a co-host. Or if you put something in the chat, I can use that to find you as well. Right. Okay, excellent. We will begin until Mr. Abbott is able to join us. If he gets the chance. He did indicate when I spoke to him earlier today that he was going to be having a difficult afternoon and his schedule might have been compromised and he might have a challenge actually getting into the room. But we are hoping nonetheless that he will be able to join us. And to the teachers who are here, I am looking in the room and I'm seeing some familiar faces, some old friends, and some new friends, persons who have always supported the councils and the council's activities. We are especially glad that you are able to join us. Just to remind you of the protocols, at the moment, all of your mics have been muted. I am absolutely certain that I have turned off the permission that you might have to unmute yourself. Let me just make sure of that. Indeed. So you're not able to unmute yourself at the moment, and therefore I don't expect any disruption from your mics. I do ask though that you bear in mind that this is a professional setting and that you give consideration to how you treat your camera. We are trying to ensure that there aren't any embarrassing moments and that you don't show the world more than you intend to show them. And so we ask that you monitor your camera. Um, the safest thing as I see it is that you turn your camera off so that you don't, because the truth is you really don't have any reason to have your camera on in this setting. This is a panel discussion where we're hoping you'll be able to benefit from the insight and perspectives of the panelists. Towards the end of the session, we will ask for those persons who have questions to share those questions. And at that time, if you have a question, you may feel free at that time to turn your camera on. But until then, it's perhaps the safest thing to turn it off at this moment. If your camera is on, and I'm speaking here to the members of the audience, not the panelists, of course, whose cameras I am encouraging you to keep on. But if your camera is on as a member of the audience, I really encourage you to make an effort to be mindful of your background. Teachers, there are simply too many instances where we have embarrassing moments in these Zoom meetings where teachers, well, participants' cameras display for the entire world to see what you perhaps don't want them to see. Remember that this is being streamed on YouTube. This meeting is being recorded. And once it goes to YouTube, it will stay there for posterity. Others will be able to view it over time. It's going to become a part of our library of videos on YouTube. So bear that in mind as you interact with the session in terms of how you use your camera and so on. Having said all of that, I feel like I am certainly anxious to get into the discussion. And so if you don't mind, I would want to start with an observation that I would want to get some comments from my panelists on. The first observation I'd want to make very quickly is that the issue of boys' education in Jamaica has been a sore point for a number of years. Each year when our examination results come out, for example, whether at the primary, secondary, or even the tertiary level, there is always evidence that boys are trailing girls in their performance. Even in some subjects that traditionally we have associated with, with, with boys, maths and science, for example, females still significantly perform better than males, even in those subjects that traditionally and elsewhere around the world are dominated by boys. What I would want to hear the panelists speak about, and I'll just go in a particular order. Do you think the education system in Jamaica is friendly to boys? And even as we talk about the education system, what do you think as well of the wider society? Do you think that the wider society encourages boys to focus on education? Let me perhaps start with Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead.
All right. I don't necessarily think that the education system is friendly to boys
I
because
don't know if
I
you're
used,
aware that you could be. Do you want to just speak a little louder or come a little closer to? Oh, okay. Go ahead and let's see if it's better.
hearing, are you hearing me now?
We are hearing you clearly.
All right. I don't necessarily think that the education system is friendly to boys. And my reason for saying this is because more males are more practical learners, hands-on learners than girls who are more theoretically sound. And the traditional way of teaching over the years has been more theoretical than it has been practical. And another thing that I think would benefit boys would be the use of cultural relevance teaching, where we integrate or associate real life scenarios into lessons. So, for example, teaching a subject like area and maths, you could take the boys out on the playing field and practically show them the length times width and all of these type of things, and pretty much let them see how relevant maths can be to their real life. Because a lot of boys do not necessarily see the importance of education because they don't see how it's going to matriculate into real life. I can speak from experience. While I was in high school doing maths was my weakest subject. The best class I've ever had was in university when the teacher took the time out to pretty much use a non-traditional way of teaching where she would have taught us how to pretty much budget, pay off credit card bills, things like those. The most fun class I can remember was that class because I saw how I could practically use mathematics in real life.
Okay. Right. And you're not sure, you're saying, Mr. Graham, that the education system as it is designed now, where certain the way instruction is carried out takes into account the methodology that boys would really appreciate.
No, and this is not coming from just my perspective. I would have had a few dialogue with a few educators. My father is an educator. I have other colleagues, male colleagues, who I would have had dialogue with on the same topic. And the common theme that came up would have been the cultural relevance of teaching or accommodating for a child's teaching or learning style, right? The child teaching in a child's learning style. Boys are more practical generally, and I don't think the education would have incorporated or taken much of an eclectic approach to teaching, and the boys would have fallen off as a result of that, in my opinion.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Graham. Can we hear from Mr. Sams? Mr. Sams, same question to you. Do you think the education system is friendly towards boys?
Okay, thank you for that. I would not totally agree with the statement, but however, I would say that the first institution of learning comes from the home. And so, although the education system may have programs, for example, at the high school, where the school, those kind of schools, especially vocational area, they have the specialized area where boys, for example, technical drawing, electrical installation, majority of the boys, as my colleague in the panel would say, that they need more. There are more practical approach in the high school. However, I would suggest that the Ministry of Education could instill some of those practical vocational area starting from the basic and the primary school as a fundamental start for them. Because in the Jamaican society, where upstanding behavior of boys and young men, which includes high academic achievement, may be viewed as not masculine, and the use of proper English, for example, often seen as soft or not cultured by how
Right.
boys, or how boys are supposed to behave. And another thing too is, you call it the gender socialization, that educators, when the girls are being raised in a particular way, some educators are most, if I'm not mistaken, that the way the girls are cultured, they expect that everybody must be cultured in the same way. And sometimes us as educators, if we are not mindful, we can be gender bias where that is concerned. So I wouldn't totally blame the ministry, but it starts from the home, the society, and we know that the first area of learning it starts from the home.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sams. I made a few notes of some of the things you said because I know I'm going to circle back to them at some point. But let me hear from the others before I come back to that. Mr. Rose, are you still here? Mr. Rose? Mr. Rose, I see you're in the meeting, but I'm not sure if your mic is open.
On mute. All right, I think I'm unmuted here. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I wouldn't, when I think about the system, I don't think it is either, it's not geared towards the boys, but I don't think it is geared not towards them, for want of a better way of putting it. It's just that it is a broad stroke for everybody to learn, because if we made it through, there is some way for the other boys to make it through as well. A lot of the programs, as I've heard, it's more theoretic based. And the boys now, to expect the boys and the girls to be moving like this when their level of development is different, it leaves some disparity there for the boys. So in terms of being geared towards them, but what it has to take is a broader approach, where it's not just a matter of the school. It is the wider influence, because they spend a few hours of the day at school. So we have to leave it from there and step into the home to see how we're approaching it. The matter of somebody being called a nerd because they're intelligent, the negative connotations put to intelligence. Why are you speaking like that? It's something, what man for chat patois, man no for chat so Jamaica we live. And so boys are continually bombarded by that. I dealt with that. Well, you think you're better than everybody, you must chat patois. A lot of these things are thrust on the boys. They're being called sissy, they're called geek, they're called nerds because they're doing the work they're supposed to. So it has to be a whole change of not just the system, but there is not so much change, but the support of everyone around. Because if we do not come to support that, to support the boys, we're the ones who pay for it later on.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I know one of the questions I definitely want to come back to is the extent to which the wider society support the education of boys. But before I circle back to that, let me just hear from Javon. Javon, you are still a student enrolled in a high school. You are at grade 11. You have done 5 years of high school thus far. Do you think, from your perspective as a student, as you reflect on your experiences, do you think that the school system is friendly towards boys?
Okay, so as you may or may not know, I attend the Wilmer's Trust High School for Boys. So this is a topic that some of us young leaders find ourselves touching on quite a lot. The simple answer under many circumstances, whether you go to a well-known school or not, is yes, schools are in fact friendly to the educational needs of boys. The undeniable truth of the matter is that it's undoubtedly our culture that influences our young men of Jamaica to think the way we think and act the way we act. I holistically believe that it isn't the way us boys are taught that needs to change. What needs to change, my teachers, is how us boys are taught to absorb the culture and practices around us, and how we allow some of these practices and mentalities to not just affect, but also mold the way we approach our education and lives in general.
Thank you very
Word.
much for that, Javon. And I just want to be clear about what Javon has said. If it bears repeating, Javon has said that the educational needs of boys are addressed by the school system. The challenge he thinks, is the wider society and how susceptible our boys are to those influences. And so it is more the village that is failing and not so much the individual entity called the school system. I know we can talk a little bit more about that, but
Just go on.
now that we have gone through all of the different participants, I'm just check again to see if Mr. Abbott is here. Mr. Abbott, if you're here, you can raise your hand so I can try to find you in the room and make you co-host so you can unmute your mic. Failing that, we're just going to move on with the other participants who are here. And Javon, I don't know if you're looking at the chat, but a number of persons are commending you for your firm affirmation of the work that teachers are doing. Right. You spoke about cultural relevance, Mr. Graham. I just wanted to go back to that for a little bit. Um, how important do you think culture is in how boys choose to learn?
Well, as Javon correctly said, there is a great need for a paradigm shift as it relates to how our society view education. Now, one of the previous panelists would have also mentioned that there are too many negative association or connotations towards boys who are educated just by speaking properly. You get nicknames like sissy, gay, etc., etc. But when you look at what society promotes in general as a socially acceptable means of behavior and interest for boys, scamming. You listen to the lyrics of music, most of what is being promoted is the scamming, the chopping, badness, use of drugs, just that lifestyle, right? So we don't necessarily have a lot of positive messages in society that promotes uh, the, the empowerment of our young boys. And that, I think, is what we need to work on, the paradigm shift on a societal level as it relates to how we associate education and boys.
Okay, indeed, indeed. Thank you for that. One of the other issues that I know came up when the participants spoke just now was the issue of masculinity. We keep hinting at it, just how society views this notion of a masculine person. Masculinity as a particular definition that society imposes on our boys, and to a great extent, many of them fall prey to it. There's a toxic view that says that a person who is a man must behave a particular way. He must, there are some things that he must do and others that he mustn't do. Education is one of those things that sometimes is not associated with masculinity. Um, Being able to articulate well, reading, all of those things are seen as soft. I wouldn't mind hearing from any member of the panel. Is this something that you have experienced? And I don't mean necessarily that you have experienced it as an individual, as learner, but even as a guidance counselor, a dean of discipline. Is this something that within your sphere you have to deal with, where you have to help other young men to better understand how to treat with this notion of masculinity?
I
Mario?
will respond. Yes, I would respond to that, Mr. Leslie.
Yes.
Where I have, I had a class at my school where I talked to them because by virtue of the fact that I'm a justice of the peace, and as a justice of the peace, we have to do lockup visits to see, to inspect the lockups at times. And I use that experience to take into like my sessions with my students, especially with the boys, to say that when I visit these lockups, there are males, and a lot of males, especially between the ages of up to 18 to 27, 25, between that age group, that high percentage of males. And I use that to say that example to say that, for boys, the society place a lot of pressure on them, because when they fall down, for example, and they start to bawl and they shed tears, the little man down the road or the little man next door says, "Stop the noise, man, yeah, man, shut up, man, if it grow tough, yeah, man." But if the girl falls down, the girls get assistance and brush her off. I would use the next example to say that if a male student, is seen on the road, not at school at a certain time, and you have people who will observe and perhaps not saying anything, and then they say that, and they see the young man talking to a female, the Lord, the young man, and say, "Why you have girl in my gallus?" But if the female is on the street in her uniform and not at school at the appropriate time, the same society, said to the female, "Look what weapon are, shout us out of school, I look man." But there is no much of emphasis is placed on the boys' importance of education. So I still ride on the fact that society really don't emphasize on education in a positive way to the boys, and looking at the boys to know that education is important. But they pressure them in the wrong way instead of uplifting them in the positive way, that instead of stereotyping them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rose, did you want to come in on that? Because I know you mentioned it as well earlier. How society sees men, and what that means for education.
I'm going to share a personal story. You had mentioned earlier that I was a ward of the state. I spent some time at Windsor Lord Children's Home, and I remember early on, I realized you're treated how you speak. So speak English, and they will treat you with a certain level of respect. And I started that, and I kept hearing a lot of, "You think you're better than everybody? Why you not chat like everybody else? Why you not do this? A man, yeah, man. Man must this, man must that." And it was a lot of that. I would step out. Why you talking different from everybody else? Yeah, no, man. You must chat patois, you must chat so. It is a lot of that is put on our boys. And I'm sure many of us here, the men here, can attest to that, hearing things like that. And it is something that we have to change. But it has to be changed. Men have to be the ones to change that, because the children learn not by what we tell them, but by what they see. They have to hear more of us speaking a certain way. They have to see more of us behaving a certain way, saying, "You know what? Yes, the girls are there, but I need an education," because at the end of the day, who's going to want somebody without an education? These are the things that we have to, as men, have to stand up and show the boys that, hey, this is important. Don't listen to them. Continue what you're doing.
All right, thank you very much. I want to go back to Javon, because we're talking a lot about role models and so on. Javon, I want to hear from you. And it is perhaps a cheeky question that you perhaps can't even answer, but why are negative role models so appealing to young people, but especially to young boys? What is it about negative role models that young boys find so appealing, whereas wholesome role models are not appealing?
Well, Mr. Leslie, in all honesty, the truth of the matter is that they're there, they're present, they're always in the line of sight. Young boys, they'd much rather go on YouTube and watch a dancehall music video than go and watch the news, because they see the news as boring. And let's use artists for example. What these artists are putting down, it's appealing and interesting to the young boys. Even the older generation, older than us current boys, would be interested in those things. So we'd be seeing them, we'd be emulating them, we'd be seeing what they're interested in and following in that same manner. So the truth of the matter, is that they're there, they're present, and they're more in our faces per se than role models, real good leaders.
Okay.
I'd
Uh,
like to piggyback on that.
yes, go ahead, Mr. Graham.
I am of the personal belief that the greatest need of society is men. And when you look at the absenteeism, that's one of the, I personally believe that absenteeism is the antithesis of a lot of the societal ills as it relates to, we don't have a lot of men anchoring the homes. And unfortunately, women have been forced to raise our boys by themselves. And a lot of our boys are being raised unbalanced. When you have a father outside of the home and not present, the next best place to go in search of a role model would be the community. And when you look at the
Mm-hmm.
community, most of what saturate our communities are scammers,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
drug abusers, etc. So what we want to do now is to try and build back that, change the paradigm to
Mm-hmm.
positive fatherhood and parenting as it relates to us not necessarily depending on society and the education system to raise our boys, but to be practical examples, physical examples in the home, nurturing our boys to be productive members of society.
Mhm.
Mm.
Indeed. I know
Word.
Rose, agree. You're good, sir. You wanted to comment on that as well.
Oh no, that's good. That's good.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you. Let's go back a little, if we can, to the issue of how schools and how instruction is designed. And to be frank with you, it's a part of what frustrates me a little, because very often I hear teachers, just like yourself, saying what should be done to educate our boys, the kind of methodology that boys would benefit from, the way instruction should be designed so that boys would be more interested. And as much as we hear people admit that this is what should be done, um, I find that by and large, that is not what is done. What is it that's creating that challenge for teachers to move from knowing what should be done to educate boys to actually doing it? I know Mr. Graham, I believe it was earlier, or was it Mr. Sams? I can't recall now, who spoke about the role of the ministry versus that of the teacher and so on. But what is it about the way the system is designed, where a teacher who knows the best way to design instruction for boys simply does not do it? What is causing that challenge, you think?
Well, I can I may I answer?
Sure, sure. Go ahead, Mr.
As I said, if I was mentioning that if as us as educators, if we are not careful, we go into the mode of gender socialization because if you look into the most of the school system, there are more female teachers than male.
Yeah.
And if you look at it in that perspective, if we are not careful, we are going to skew our lessons. Well, that would fit. When we know that the females, and you know that females are grow up a certain way,
Hmm.
and they're supposed to behave a certain manner, we tend to want the boys to behave in that like manner as well. You understand me? And boys, we tend to, like, for example, we know that the girls are most likely doing well and so forth, but we forget that boys are more concrete learners. We forget that boys are more practical, whereas females are more meticulous and so forth. And we tend to skew that in that manner, that we want the boys to be doing the same as how the girls would do. And we tend to have that gender socialization. If we are not careful, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but sometimes we have that tendency. And sometimes we know at the back of our heads that it ought not to be, but we get so caught up into the lesson, we forget that the boys are more hands on. The boys tend to be more practical, and so we forget that we can skew our lessons in that manner. So if we're not careful, we can lead into that situation.
Mhm. Yes.
And that's a very good point. Representation always matters, right? And when you have a male teaching a male, it can go a far way because the nature similarity would be more, beneficial to that child. Now, um, in response to my colleague, as it relates to the possible bias that could be, in the education system, because the education system is obviously more saturated with female teachers than males, and I think it's a subconscious bias where a female teacher would naturally just, create her lesson plans more from her nature versus taking into account
True.
the male. I don't think it's bias. I don't think it's intentional. I just think it's a subconscious thing where people tend to do things based on who they are. And it would take a little bit more effort now to take into account the other members who would have been affected or benefited from a particular lesson based on the way it is taught, from my opinion.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Graham. Javon, I want to ask you pointedly, is this true? Is it true that female teachers don't teach as well as male teachers do? And I know that's not exactly what you said, Mr. Graham, but I'm being deliberately provocative. Is it true, Javon, that female teachers don't know how to teach, but male teachers know how to?
Okay, so that's not true, but I think it's all about the approach. The approach is everything. For example, I have a male chemistry teacher, right? And we all know that sometimes chemistry can be really hard. But you see, with him, everybody always understands what he's teaching. And the thing is, he comes to our level. So, say a lot of boys, would be more comfortable speaking Patwa, right? So he has no problem with that. Remember, it's an all-boys school, so everybody is better able to associate with him, with him getting down to our level and not just associating to better understand the topic, And as for female teachers, nothing is wrong with the way they teach. But the approach for male teachers, it is definitely more familiar. That's for a fact.
Okay. Okay. And I like.
Here's a possible suggestion, since
Go ahead.
we have a lot of teachers here. I during college I came up with the idea that it would be better if we stream students according to their learning styles versus academic performance, and to see if we can better reach a larger number of students as it relates to the quality of education being imparted based on learning style as opposed to the grades. Teachers in the chat, what do you think about that suggestion? Do you think it's
Right.
practical, or am I being impractical?
Already, I see a number. I see Ms. Bowie agreeing with you, Mr. Graham. But I also wanted to ask the chat if there's a teacher here, because the question that I still am grappling with is, if we all know the methodology that reaches boys, why aren't we doing it? What is the reason for that disconnect? Why can't our intentions, why can't our convictions become our practice? What is it that is causing that disconnect? And if there's a teacher in the room who wishes to share, whether in the chat or you want to put up your hand and share, you can tell us, just to give us your perspective, what is causing that disconnect? Why our convictions do not always become our practice? Oh, I see a hand went up immediately. Let me just take one, and I'll just allow Miss Willis. Is it Miss Willis? Miss Willis, go ahead. You're unmuted, but I'm asking you to unmute.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I really, really wanted to say something because I have a son, and when he just passed to go to high school, because he speaks proper English, and when he passed his exam to go to high school, he came to me and said, "Mommy, I can't talk this way when I go to high school." And it bothered me so much. It really bothered me. And I'm saying, really, there really is a disconnect when it comes to how boys conduct themselves in high school, right? And I think that it's time and patience, because I'm always thinking about the boys being left behind, but it takes time and it takes patience, because boys need that interactive, sort of learning, and it takes time for the teacher. And because we have to maintain the curriculum to make sure we complete the curriculum and all of that, because the standardized testing, so it really, it impedes the teacher to actually do what we know best, because we do know that the male would actually like to go out and to manipulate and to work in the entire environment, but it actually takes time and patience, and I think that is the reason.
Okay. All right, thank you very much for that, Miss Willis. If we have
Yes.
time, Alicia Big with Smart, we'll come back to you. But let's go back to the panelists very quickly, because there's another issue that I know I wanted to spend a little bit more time on than we have spent so far. The issue of what society can do to help. We always talk about the village raising the child with specific reference to education. What are some of the things that society can do to help boys, um, or to help the school system to educate our boys? What are some of the things that we would expect? Who are these other stakeholders that we're talking about? Who are these persons in the village? And what is it that we expect them to do? I don't know who wants to dive on that. Mr. Rose, perhaps we should start with
All
you.
right, I'd like to touch on it.
Okay,
Go ahead. Go
go ahead.
ahead.
Who's going?
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead. I'll
go
go
ahead.
after you.
Okay. The idea of the village raising children has been done away with, unfortunately, from the previous generations. And nobody wants you to tell them how to raise their children anymore. And people are more independent now, and in most cases, unfortunately, selfish. And the support system that raised generations before are no longer as strong or in existence as it was back in the day. We have way more single parents now raising children than the extended family that would have raised children. The extended family naturally would have provided more of a support system, more of a monitoring system, more of a guidance system, more of a modeling system. And I am of the opinion that the greatest injustice to our society is poor parenting. And unfortunately, many of our parents today would have adopted a lot of permissive parenting styles, wanting to be more of the friend of their children than they actually want to be parents and guardians. And this I see matriculating into the indiscipline within the schools, because parents are not necessarily disciplinarians. When you have meetings with them and you get to interact with them, you get a greater understanding and in some cases a great empathy for the students. Because when you see who and how they're being raised, then it's a great cause for concern. And as one of the panelists would have mentioned previously, is that the first place that children learn is at the home. And if the home is broken and dysfunctional, and the paradigms within the home does not support education for boys, then we're in a great trouble for the present and the future.
And thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Rose, you wanted to say something on this?
Yes. Well, what we have to do, as you see, the village raising the child, as our panelists said, it's the family dynamics have changed. But what we can do as a society, we keep looking at it and saying the artists put this out, the artists put that out, social media shows this, social media shows that. We have to use the same medium, the same ways that they are reached by the negative. We have to take that over. We have to take. I'm a singer. I'm a musician. I sing. So I now have to take positive message, find other singers who are pushing positive messages, and we need to put it so that it's visible, so that they're hearing it, playing it on the radio so that they hear it every day, just like they're hearing the slackness. It must be on YouTube, just like how they go on there and find it. So wherever they find the negative, we have to counter that, because they're doing it because it is available. It is what is put towards them. It is what is they're bombarded with. So we must, as the village, bombard them with it. Bombard them with the love. Bombard them with the positive reaffirmation. Bombard them with the support, and then we will see the change. Because that is how we are different, because we had that support. We were bombarded by it, even though all the other things were there.
Right.
One of the things I think we can do is to collaborate with the youth innovation centers, utilize our youth empowerment officers, use the REAP program, the Realize, Embrace, and Achieve Your Purpose, the YMAP program, Heart Trust. What we can do is create intervention programs at the school level that will positively promote the empowerment of our boys. Within my school, I started a program called the Kings and Queens Mentorship Program. where on a weekly basis I would have had meetings independently, both with the females by themselves and with the males by themselves, and try to have some psychosocial development sessions with them individually.
Mm-hmm.
So as Sir rightfully said, we have to neutralize the negativity with the positivity. And we can do it at a home level, at the school level, and at a community level. So this is where we need to start thinking. We don't necessarily want to spend most of the time identifying the problems, but try and find possible solutions and implementing these solutions as soon as possible so that we can start seeing a change, because our society, as I said before, is in need of productive men. Too many women, unfortunately, are being left alone to raise the family by themselves, and it is an impossible task to ask them to do.
Right, right, right. Thank you, thank you. I just have one more question before I perhaps ask. Mr. Abbott. Let me just quickly make Mr. Abbott a co-host and welcome into this space. Mr. Abbott, as I mentioned to you earlier, is one of our principals. I think Sunbury Primary. I think he just managed to get into the room. Mr. Abbott, welcome. You can unmute your mic, sir. You have that right. You have that privilege, meaning I've granted you that privilege as a co-host. We are just about to wrap up the discussion, though, Mr. Abbott, coming to the end of our 1 hour time. But nonetheless, thank you for joining us. I did tender apologies for you ahead of time, but I will give you a chance in a minute or two to share with us. Perhaps I will do that just now. One of the things I definitely wanted to hear from you, Mr. Abbott, as a principal, is do you think our school system is friendly to boys? The other panelists have spoken about this before, but I wouldn't mind hearing your perspective on that.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very
Good
much.
afternoon.
Well, in all fairness, I think some schools are trying their best to actually engage our boys, but generally, more needs to be done. I think our boys are being robbed because of how we actually engage them within our educational system. And also, our boys need to see us who are educators, principals, teachers. They want to see us in the community, not only just to drive in on a Monday to Friday and drive out. But as male figures, role models in the community, we have to go there, go and play football with the boys. We have to engage them in different activities and let them see that we're not only just there as a principal within a community or a teacher within a community, but we're actually a part of them. And what I also really want to share with you is that at Sunbury, what we have done, because I'm really passionate about boys' education in Jamaica, we launched a program called ROBME, ROBME. And what it stands for is rescuing our boys through meaningful and enjoyable activities. And this program, the rationale behind it, we're seeing that our boys are being robbed because of how we actually engage them. This article was actually featured in the Gleaner also. So if you go on Google and you type in Rob Me, you will actually see the article there. So some schools are trying, but generally more needs to be done as we seek to rescue the boys of this nation.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, sir. The last thing I wanted to ask the panelists, though, and somebody actually just mentioned it in the chat, Melissa Thompson Williams, I thank you for raising this because it's the last thing I wanted to raise. We really can't allow boys, though, to escape some responsibility for their own learning. We have to teach them to become more self-driven, to act with maturity. And sometimes I wonder if all this rhetoric about boys needing help and boys being marginalized, as it made some of the boys believe that they are victims and they play into this victimhood. Sometimes I wonder, to what extent do you think our boys are being prepared to take control of their lives, to make the right decisions, and not always be depending on support and help and assistance from others? I definitely want to hear from each panelist on that, and I also want to hear from Javon in particular, because I want him to tell us a little bit about just his own understanding of what his role as a learner is. What is the
I want to touch on that real quick.
And what is your responsibility as a learner? So go ahead. I think Mr. Graham perhaps wants to jump on it first.
Yes, I'd like to touch on it. I think it has to do with the socialization and how boys are being raised. Um, as opposed to their counterparts, young ladies are being raised to be independent, educated, um, strong. Boys are more dependent, right? They are more spoiled, they're more cuddled, they're more babied, as it were. And you see it coming out in the way that they behave in the schools, in the home, and in society at large. So I think the way in which we structure our parenting, we need to have some form of equity in terms of how we raise our boys and our girls. Raise boys to be more responsible, raise them to be men, raise them to see themselves as victors and not victims. And I think once you have that paradigm shift from the parenting standpoint, from the home standpoint, school, society at large, then we will now have a greater platform to hold men and young boys to a greater level of accountability than we have previously, than we have not been doing previously.
And I would like to add to that what Mr. Graham has said, that the whole bringing up of children, a lot of times when we give it responsibility, as Mr. Graham said, the girls are given the responsibility how to train them to become independent and good wives, while the men will just sit and just not doing anything, but give them the shared responsibility so that they can see the importance of being a responsible person and not solely to depend on their partner or wherever they depend, that to develop that dependency syndrome, but give them
All right.
strong responsibility, and also to instill good leadership. And I want to agree with Mr. Fitzroy Abbott that speaks about the boys. We rob them of it. I'm very strategic, especially when I'm doing boys' day at my school. When I'm inviting speakers, especially if I'm having boys' day and I'm inviting speakers, I invite speakers who are male and to interact with them because they are role models so that they can instill that, okay, although I am a manager somewhere, I can have fun just like I can play a football, but you still instill certain value in them so that they can be good leaders and so forth. They can integrate themselves in society and be very flexible where that is concerned.
All right, thank you so much. Mr. Leslie had an emergency. We apologize for that, and the conversation is going on. Javon, did you get a chance to speak?
No, not as yet.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so I definitely agree with all our panelists so far. Something extremely crucial is to instill in all our young boys a drive for success. That is extremely crucial right now because now too many of us have this bad man mentality, Mikia Bada mentality, that needs to leave, and us to instill in them that you're not going to be able to get this in life if you don't work hard for it. What you put in is what you get out. These are the values that we need to instill in them so that they move away from the not so the things that they really shouldn't be pursuing right now and focus on things that they can do to really build proper lives in Jamaica. Yes, so it's all about the drive for success right now.
Thank you, and I'd like to say too, I thank you for being so articulate, Mr. Hyman. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at 4:15. We have another minute. The conversation has been very good. And in the chat, you guys have been putting a lot of things that are quite realistic and making some suggestions. I love it. I would just like to give our panelists that last minute to just wrap up any kind of suggestions, recommendations. Well, I've heard a lot, but just any last words, parting words that you would like to say. Let's start with Mr. Rose first. I see you, Mr. Rose.
Just something simple. Children live what they learn. Plain and simple. And boys are immatured. And we have to stop and think sometimes, are we expecting too much of the boys too soon? I'm just throwing something in there. But boys will be boys, and we've been saying that. And if they are boys, we have to treat them as such. And we have to train them and show them. We don't just tell them. Children live what they learn, they live and do what they see, not what they're told.
I'll go next.
Okay.
On a daily, my approach to my job is for every child, every boy specifically that I positively influence, that is one less gunman, one less scammer that will be inducted into society. So my parting words would be positive mentorship and accountability. We need more positive men to take on the responsibility of mentoring our young boys so that in the end we can hold them accountable.
Word.
And I want to say, I was thinking the same line in terms of having mentorship instilled in the schools. So I would suggest the Ministry of Education to instill programs like mentorship for boys and girls, because we want to strike the balance just the same and instill values and attitudes. And also to start it from the basic school, start from the very foundation, the importance of the role leadership in society, and importance of grabbing the role models to target the primary and the basic school, starting from there. And also to what I would want to also encourage the Ministry of Education is to incorporate the more practical vocational subjects at the primary school. We know that when we go to high school, the boys especially engage in the vocational area. But to see if we can develop curriculum and programs at the primary level where the boys can be engaged in the more practical aspect of learning.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Sams.
My final word,
Mr. Abbott.
yes, my final word is that it takes a village to raise a child. What I really want to say, though, which is a sad reality, is that our villages have become corrupt. There are too many negatives within our village. And unless we clean up the village, then we will continue to lose our boys. As I've been saying, that our boys are being robbed, and we can rescue them. But we have to get programs that are boys oriented. We have to get persons who understand how boys learn. We have to get these persons to engage our boys. And if we do these things, we can actually rescue our boys. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm leaving the last word here to Mr. Hyman.
Yes, so I'll end by saying that the most crucial thing that we need to ensure our boys know right now is to what extent they should absorb the cultural practices in our day-to-day lives right now. They need to know that they can't let everything out there affect their lives drastically. They need to know what to bring in, what should be used to help to mold them, and what they should leave for another time or somebody else.
Awesome. Mr. Graham, did I hear from you?
Yes, you did.
Right. I apologize for that. All right. I really love the conversation, and I see in the chat that everyone thought it was a wonderful session. Again, F.I.T 2020, talking about innovation, talking about moving on, and we can't leave the boys behind. All right. And we are very serious about boys' education here at the JTC. And even psychosocially, I love to have Mr. Mario Samson, the guidance counselor, on that psychosocially.
Certainly. Yes.
Having responsible men contributing to education and society is also important for females, right? Mm-hmm. So that's absolutely, we could go on and on about this.
True.
But our time has come to an end, and I want to thank you all personally to this conversation was made lively and interesting because of all of you panelists invoking all of that in us, and then made even better by the contributions in the chat that I'm looking at, right? Dana Sadie Ann Smith-Foreman says, can you imagine that even 50 boys are still boys at even 50 years old, right? Absolutely, they still are the same. So just talking about all of this was wonderful, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining. The JTC wants everybody to be safe. On behalf of Mr. Leslie and the JTC, I thank you all for coming. F.I.T is not done for day 2. We have another session at 5 o'clock. So please just join us on our F.I.T website, or some links were shared with registered participants. I thank you all, and from F.I.T 2020, Good night. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Lady Alison, and good to see you again.